Okay,
I'll second that. Yeah.
we have a motion and a second, and I call upon whomever in the room to discern who said motion and second, because I can't see them. With that motion and second, all of those in favor of accepting those minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item of business. Is there any old business to come before the committee? All right, thank you. And we have one discussion item, as customary in the investment subcommittee, welcoming our friends from ClearStud to provide us with a quarterly portfolio asset allocation and investment performance review. So Sarah and John are on the line and live via WebEx. And I will turn it over to both of you.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Would you like us to pull up our material, or do you have that in front of you?
We have it.
I think that it would be for those people that are watching online, which I believe there are. I think that it would be appropriate if I could if I could just throw my 2 cents in. Anyone can push back on this. I think that it would be helpful to share the slides online via WebEx, so those that are viewing via Facebook and YouTube are able to see the same information. So I don't care who does it, if it's Sarah, John, or the folks there in the room.
Are you able to do that? Sarah can share.
So, John can hold up while I start speaking. That works?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll let John do that, and let me just dive right into it. So on page 2 of ClearStud's presentation with today's date, we show you an agenda. As usual, we'll just give you the quick highlights for each of these 3 agenda items. I'm going to walk you through the first 2 and parts of the third, and then John is going to go into a little bit more detail on the strategic asset allocation review and ORC compliance that we completed this quarter. If you move to page 3, you'll see that we continue to keep you on track with the initiatives that not only we feel you need to hear every quarter, but also those that are guided by the Ohio Revised Code. So certainly next quarter, we will do our annual fee review where you'll see transparent fee for each of your investment managers for ClearStud and any custody fees. But you can see for the third quarter, we have quite a few check the box items that we'll be reviewing today. On the next slide, we get into the capital markets, which is slide 5, excuse me. We certainly could talk for the entire day about what has been going on in the markets. So I'll be very brief, but please interject with questions. Certainly a significantly strong quarter, the second quarter, after a very disappointing first quarter. So a lot of what has been plaguing the markets continues to plague the markets. You know, for example, when we're going to have a vaccine, if there's a potential double dip, if there is a reemergence of the virus in the fall, and now we have the presidential elections. But that being said, we certainly continue to see the market moving upward. The S&P is up over 10% as of yesterday, year to date. Your portfolio, you'll see if you were to look as of yesterday, you're actually positive year to date, despite all of the drawbacks that we saw in the first quarter. What we continue to tell our clients and what we continue to preach is that the best way to manage this upcoming and continuing volatility is to stay disciplined, maintain your long-term objectives, keep that long-term focus, and continue to follow your investment policy. The worst thing you can do through the volatility is try to change the course and try to outsmart and time the market. So that's how we've continued to manage the assets. That's the basis for all of our recommendations. And you'll notice as we go through the material that we have kept you very tight to those investment policy targets for each of the asset classes. Visually, you can see on page 6 the performance through the second quarter. And then also on page 7, we show you fixed income movements. The reason why we point this out is because 50% of your long-term pool is in bonds. And so certainly interest rates and income are very applicable to your portfolio. We saw a significant price movement with the bonds in your portfolio in the second quarter. And so you'll see a very favorable return there as well, but interest rates continue to be very low. The 10-year Treasury yield is 0.66%, which is about where it's hovering today. That means that if you buy a 10-year Treasury bond from the US government, you're going to get 0.66% a year, every year for 10 years. So not a significant yield, but we did see a stabilization in the fixed income markets in the second quarter as the government did step in. They purchased some high yield debt, some ETFs, and that caused some stabilization, which provided some price movement upward. Looking at performance on page 9, we show you this is through 6/30. So for the quarter, you did very well. The long-term pool was actually up double digits, up 10.1% net of fees. For the month of July, you actually experienced another positive by about 2%, another 2% movement. So at the end of July, the long-term pool was slightly positive. And for the month of August, we would estimate that you've earned about another 1.5% to 2%. So you are in the green, I guess you could say, for the year-to-date numbers. So after a pretty horrific start, we seem to be rebounding. Hopefully we can hold on to some of this momentum, but there is a lot at stake and there's a lot out in the marketplace that's continuing to possibly cause some volatility. So as a reminder, you do have that 50% to fixed income that will provide you some stabilization from all the swings. And if you look on page, I'm going to skip to page 11, we show you kind of the most recent state of the market at the end of July, where you can see the balance of the long-term pool and how that balance has come down slightly.
Interject real quickly. If you look at that chart or graph on page 10, you'll see 2 withdrawals that we had made from the long-term pool. One was back in 2011. We moved $8 million from the long-term pool specifically to fund an early retirement incentive program. And then in 2018, we moved $8 million out of the long-term pool strategically to fund a number of important construction projects on campus. But what's not shown on this chart, but what's noted on slide 11, is that we did move $2.9 million out of the long-term pool at the end of July. And the only strategy there was strictly cash flow. So I wanted to point that out because our prior uses had been a little bit more strategic, which is what we want to see. This latest withdrawal at the end of July was really almost $3 million, really just to make sure we had enough cash on hand to meet payroll and to just generally make sure we had enough cash on hand to continue operations. I wanted to make that point clear because I think it's a clear sign of some financial distress that the university has in fact incurred over the last few months, largely as a result of COVID and some of the cash challenges we've had. So the good news is I think our cash position has stabilized, but I did want to draw the committee's attention to that.
Thank you very much. It's very, very important.
Thank you. Well, if you have any questions about any movements, any of the investments, I'm going to turn things over to John, but we're always happy to take a deep dive into the investment managers if you'd like. And there's quite a bit of information in the appendix.
Our firm reviews asset allocation and investment policy for each of our clients. We do extensive analysis on asset allocation and bring in a more summary format our findings to this group with any proposed revisions to the current strategy. On this page and the following pages, what you'll note is wise use of objectives and constraints, return expectations, and risk considerations for the non-endowment university assets. From organizational risk on the bottom right part of this page, one of those, very important, is the Ohio Revised Code that the university makes sure is within compliance, which we review on an annual basis with this committee. Other investment-related risk are on the right part of this page. Terminology you might be familiar with, such as standard deviation and beta. On page 14, in summary, over the years, the strategy in place for the non-endowment assets has done well. From a performance perspective, since the inception of the long-term pool, which was in July of 2010, so 10 years ago, the long-term pool has generated a 5% return. Given the conservative and prudent oversight and asset allocation of the long-term pool, which includes 50% in fixed income, that return is pretty good given the risk-return profile of the long-term pool. On the bottom part of page 14 goes into more specific detail of those same risk considerations. For the Ohio Revised Code, making sure that you have a certain amount or percentage of assets in cash and government-related security. A lot of that is in the pool structure, the operating and short-term pool, but also given the risk-return profile of the long-term pool, a portion of those assets helps provide support in maintaining Ohio Revised Code compliance. From a liquidity aspect, on page 15, the non-endowment university assets has a investment pool structure. All assets are daily liquid. The operating pool and short-term pool are more related to and immune to or have fluctuations in dollar amounts that are in line with the operating cash flows of the university. The long-term reserve pool is where the university has a modest amount of risk going into growth-oriented assets such as equities and alternatives, which comprise a 50% target. As Neil mentioned, the university over the past 10 years has dipped into the long-term and reserve pool a few times on a more strategic basis. Page 16 takes our capital market assumptions for the next 10 years, given the target weightings of the long-term pool, and gives this committee a feel for expected return and expected standard deviation. That volatility number of around 6% is similar as in years past, though as Sarah alluded to going over where the interest rate environment is at in fixed income markets, the forecasted return or return expectation for the long-term pool has come down from around 5%, which is how you performed over the past decade, to around 4%. With about 50% in fixed income, interest rates and returns out of fixed income are going to have a big impact on expected return of the total pool. Page 17, so we look at things forward-looking, expected returns, but also as humans, we're always curious how this asset allocation would perform historically. Over the past 15 years, the long-term pool would have generated closer to a 5.5% return. So if you think about over the past 15 years, interest rates were certainly higher 15 years ago. Equity markets have done exceptionally well over that time frame. But looking forward, we expect a little bit of a lesser return forecast given where we're at in the world today. Page 18 goes over details. So every quarter we show you the growth of the long-term pool in a chart format. This goes into detail since the inception and funding of the long-term pool, different metrics each calendar year, leading up to the 6/30/2020 value in the bottom right part of this screen. The long-term pool, since its funding, has had a cumulative return over 50%. On this page in the middle part are the columns for the asset allocation, and over time, the university has built up a little bit more of a risk allotment in assets of equities and alternatives from around 20% in 2010 to the 50% target weighting that you have today. Lastly, I'll go to page 20. As I mentioned, on an annual basis, we review the Ohio Revised Code compliance for the non-endowment university assets. On the bottom part of this page goes into all of the different details. Over 25% of the total portfolio needs to be in cash equivalent or government securities. An investment policy must be adopted. Quarterly investment committee meetings. Retaining an investment advisor, who meets the qualifications. The university is in compliance with all of the stated guidelines within the Ohio Revised Code.
John, Sarah, conclusion of your formal presentation?
Yes.
Seems yes.
I'll open it up if there's any other questions that Sarah and I can answer at this time.
Great. Are there any questions from folks there on campus?
No questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Seeing no additional questions, Sarah and John, thank you for the report. We appreciate the information. Is there any new business to come before the investment subcommittee? Thank you. Hearing none, is there a motion for adjournment?
Motion.
Second? All right, with a motion and a second, all in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Yes, signify by saying aye. Thank you very much. With that motion and vote, the investment subcommittee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day.
Our friends up there.
Bye-bye.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the audit committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Call to order the audit subcommittee. First, are there any changes or issues with the minutes? Any old business? No, sir. Committee items will go to discussion items. First one is C1A tab 1. Kelly Miller is the audit matrix open audit recommendations update.
Yes, good afternoon. It's nice to be back in the room with you guys today. Yeah, let's take a look at tab 1, which is the matrix. I'll run you down through the status of those quickly. Item 2015-0302, which is the faculty tracking, the workload tracking. That was launched without delay, despite the COVID situation that was taking place. It was used in April to calculate full-time faculty workload and in May to process payments that were made to those faculty. So we're making some progress there. They are currently conducting weekly meetings to address progress in that area, and they're considering whether they can use that program to actually course cost, which would be a nice improvement to see. I have not closed this. And the reason we have not closed this at this point is because this FLAC area is on our audit program, our schedule for the upcoming year. And so when we go out to take a look at that process as a whole, we'll take a look at the status of this recommendation and anticipate closing that at that point. But we're not going to do some interim work and then go out a little bit later. The next 8 items are all research related. We do see the second item, 2018-02-03, being closed in this quarter in conjunction with actually a board policy that you guys implemented very recently. So that one has indeed closed. Other things are on schedule. We see that with regard to the conflict of interest. They are actually using the new system at this point to track current new grant activity coming in and flag any conflicts of interest. They haven't fully been able to go back at this point and incorporate all of the old programs. So that's still in progress as well. If it's an old grant, it hasn't necessarily been 100% converted. If it's a new grant, it is being entered and tracked by the system at this point. So we still consider that in progress. We see that as well on item number 4, which is actually on schedule and anticipated that we'll see some changes with that federal grant reporting for subrecipients by the end of the year. Item 5 is communications and training. A lot of training has actually taken place in this past quarter with regard to the implementation of the new system. We did extend the date, however, in anticipation of the fact that the modules, all of the external processes that take place and sort of surround that new implementation of the system are still being trained and worked through. And so they did say, although they felt like they had really trained well with regard to implementation of the basic program, there was a lot of work left to be done in this area with all the surrounding modules. So we'll continue to take to keep an eye on that. The next item in this area relates to budgets. And again, same as we've mentioned earlier, the system is in place. All new activity is going through that system. There is an interface with Banner with regard to tracking these budgets. The old activities have that same interface. So here we do see that it's being utilized for both old and new grant activity. But again, there's still some documentation and paperwork on older grants that hasn't been fully transitioned, if you will, to the new process. And monitoring, again, same thing. The new system is being utilized. We're in transition there. Travel expenses, item number 10, were delayed because of some vacancies that we have in the procurement department and COVID and lack of staffing. So that one's kind of stretched out again until the end of the year. And with regard to number 11, full system implementation at this point, just again, really focused on making sure that we know how to use that well. This one, again, we've not cleared these. We'll be out in the next couple of months. That you'll see these dates are very recent. So they were working on these like at the end of July, and we'll be out in the next few weeks to actually kind of follow up behind them and make sure that I'm in agreement that these have indeed closed and that from my perspective, we are in the position that they believe that we are. And the remaining items have to do with our student experience with our student organization audit that took place. Again, I believe those are completely on track. I spoke with Aaron just the other day. I think those changes are completely on track, probably in place at this point for the most part. They were due on 8/31. We'll be going out in the next few weeks to just follow up on those and make sure we can get those closed. So just a really recent date there. So no follow up at this point, but we'll certainly take a look at that in the next few weeks. Any questions on the audit matrix? All right, then if you'll move to tab 2, that's the internal audit plan. This is actually our last opportunity to take a look at last fiscal year's audit plan. So we are looking back at this point to June 30th of 2020. It's our final recap of those activities. Largely, the hours were on track. We did lose some intern hours with COVID and evacuating campus. So that really constitutes the difference between the 2138 that was scheduled and the 2014 that we actually incurred. You'll notice that the hours were utilized differently than planned at the budget process, but certainly very productive. And that's pretty typical in an internal audit office because we're responding to risk. So we may plan certain things at the beginning of the year and then move into different areas based on risk assessments. And certainly we saw a lot of that. At this point, we really have moved on to the 2021 audit program, which you guys approved at the last meeting. So the focus has shifted from these things that you see here to the Rich Center audit, to donor restricted audit, to Banner and to FLAC, which are the items that are planned for 2021. The Rich Center audit is fully underway at this point. We engaged that audit on the 23rd of July. We are focusing, the objectives are taking a look at operational procedures and processes, financial and operational information, and compliance with policies. If you guys recall, this one was prioritized from a risk perspective because of some activity that we saw on the hotline. And so we're knee deep in this at this point. I have completed the review of the agreement and the identification of the requirements that align with that agreement. We have done, I'm actually meeting tomorrow with Greg to do some walkthroughs of processes We're in the process of looking at transactions and supporting documents from a financial perspective with the Controller's Office. We have looked at communications that have taken place from the Rich Center to the university and vice versa. And we are working again, as we look at those transactions, we'll be taking a hard look at compliance with policies and procedures. I do certainly, even at this early date, expect that you guys will see some findings in that final report next quarter, really related to the fact that we're working under an outdated agreement. So I'm hopeful that the board will take a look and make it a priority to take a look and work through that agreement, really focusing on the benefits and the risks and the best practices between the university and the Rich Center as that new agreement is implemented. We want to make sure that the policies and procedures are consistent with the university policies and procedures. The hotline inquiries are really what, again, instigated this, and there are some indications that there were some distinctions in policies and procedures and how they were being implemented there. So I anticipate that you'll be hearing more detail on that. And really, it's been a good process though, and I would, certainly say that Greg Borio, the interim executive director there, and Teresa Orwell in the Controller's Office have been very open and accommodating and really working through that process and looking at it from a beneficial perspective. So that's good. So again, that is our update on plans versus what we've actually accomplished and are in the process of accomplishing at this point. Any questions there? Yes.
Is there a change to your audit plan or any special documentation? Is that funding those dollars?
We have not formally changed the audit plan, and the reason is because there are some advisory hours that were certainly embedded in the audit plan at any point in time. I've certainly done a lot of reading, reached out to those parties involved, and we actually have a hotline inquiry now that it appears to have some relationship to that. So there will definitely be the use of advisory hours as it relates to CARES, but not a formal change at this point. Yes. All right, at tab 3 then, you will see the hotline reporting. Much quieter than the prior quarter. If you remember, that last quarter was a very busy quarter. Everybody's off campus. I guess there's not a lot to talk about right now. But we do anticipate an uptick and have actually, it had been quiet for a few weeks and then had a case come through this week. I have prioritized that one just because of the nature of it. It does seem to have a correlation to CARES funding and how payments were being handled. And so I'm kind of entrenched in looking at that right now. I don't have concerns about our policies and practices or compliance with the CARES Act. I do maybe have some concerns about, we'll see how things kind of shake out, but I do maybe have some concerns about maybe we acted quickly and then fixed something and made the arrangement the situation a little difficult for a student. But the bursar's office, clearly is jumping through hoops to try to fix that. So I think it is probably one of those things that we were trying to do the best we could early. And just because of changing circumstances, things got a little muddied. But it certainly seems to have been handled appropriately. But we'll complete that process and report that back more formally. All right. Any questions on the hotline? All right. Item D on the discussion agenda is enterprise risk management. You don't have any documents for that. Enterprise risk management has been transitioned. With Sue's retirement, that has been transitioned back into my office at this point. So we are actively working through that process. We've continued on in the midst of COVID, done remote meetings, much like this. So we did a July meeting and addressed 3D printing with Jay. And then in August, we were with Jessica Chill regarding cyber learning, which is obviously a very transitional and risky area right now that has been busy here on campus. So Jessica presented to us in August. We are taking a break. We normally meet the first Monday, so that would be Labor Day. So we are not meeting in September, but then in October, we'll have Mark Weir with us on Title IX. So our agenda continues in Sue's absence, and Those meetings have been very robust, and I think the committee is strong and really taking a deep dive into what's going on from a risk perspective, campus-wide. It's a great group. All right, so that's our discussion items.
Okay, so we'll move to C2A tab 4, which is a resolution to renew and amend the audit subcommittee charter.
All right, you guys have all had a chance, I think, over the last few months to take a look at this. You've seen it in draft at the last meeting. And I'll just, again, bring your attention to the reasons for the changes really relate to independence for the subcommittee members. It's all best practices. The key concepts all kind of fluctuated around best practices for this group and getting our language updated in some cases to actually reflect what was already probably going on from a best practices perspective. So we are defining and mandating independence for committee members. We are defining financial expertise and focusing on having that representation on the committee. We are formalizing practices regarding record keeping, including the agenda, the minutes and reporting, again, all which were already taking place, but this is just formalizing that in our document. Focusing on compliance as a key function and responsibility of the subcommittee. Defining the investigative authority of the subcommittee. Defining no unjustified restrictions on our internal audit processes. Defining the ability to meet privately with your independent auditors, and including a self-review process as part of the charter. We did a little bit of housekeeping and streamlining, but the items noted above are really the focus of the changes.
Kelly, as far as the financial expert, I think the verbiage we've used with financial expert should be if possible, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. And focusing really on the fact that we can incorporate training and do some other things there to make sure that that expertise is present.
That's why the if possible is in there, because you may not have that, right? So it's, and we talked about financial expert can be
yes,
a medley of things.
Mm-hmm. And we've got some language in here that focuses on that definition, but does give you some flexibility with bringing that member in and making sure that you're trained appropriately and that sort of thing.
It was a long discussion.
A lot of long discussions. One question that Molly asked at the last meeting that I thought was really very good, and I'll draw your attention to that as well, was the interface. The fact that this document does not address really the interface between the audit subcommittee and the internal audit office and me in particular. That is because by definition that is done in the internal audit charter. So there is a secondary document here that does address that relationship. So keep that in mind.
Does anyone have any questions regarding the resolution? Is there a motion? So moved. Second. All in favor?
All right, thank you.
New business.
I just have one quick update, if I could. In addition to all the activity and all the work that Kelly described today, we should also mention that the university's external audit partner, Plant Moran, is scheduled to begin fieldwork next week on Monday. Plant's work will involve an in-depth audit of the university's financial position and our financial statements and our internal controls. Now, this is something we do every year, so it shouldn't be a big deal from that perspective, but this is the first year with Plant Moran as our audit partner. So the results of that audit, along with the university's audited financial statements, will be presented to the audit subcommittee in December, so our next quarter. So everything is on track. It's just a real quick update. We're not expecting any surprises, but I do want to hedge just a little bit, because anytime you're working with a new audit partner, a new audit firm, it is possible that they will see things a little bit differently than your prior audit partner, which in our case was Crowe Horwath. So I guess that's one way of saying maybe the risk or the possibility of an audit finding this year might be just a little bit elevated. And to your question earlier, Dr. Hackstead, we do expect Plant Moran to do some testing on use of CARES Act. And that some of the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education has been a little bit slow coming out, a little bit contradictory at times. And so that's another reason I want to hedge just a little bit on what Plant might report to us in December. So that concludes my update.
President Truss, Motion to adjourn. Okay, officially adjourned. I know. All right. Call to order the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Any changes or issues with minutes? We have none. Any old business? No, sir. Okay. Let's start with C1A Tab 1, resolution to approve the Rich Center for Autism's operating cost for 2021. Right here. Okay, all right. Yeah, we'll move on then.
Unless they're here. Greg, just in time. So while Greg makes his way up here, I'll just provide a little bit of background. As part of the 2010 agreement between the university and the Rich Center, the YSU Board of Trustees is required to approve the Rich Center's budget each year. And typically, we will incorporate the Rich Center's budget into the university's annual operating budget and approve it in that format. But we thought it was a kind of a nice opportunity to hear directly from the Rich Center today and about their budget, but also any other activities over there. It's also kind of timely because, as you heard Kelly Miller just mentioned, she's doing an audit right now of the Rich Center in the agreement. So in some ways, this discussion today might be a little bit of a primer in preparation for the audit subcommittee to receive that audit next quarter. So Greg, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. And as we review the Rich Center FY21 budget, my name's Greg Borio, and I have been with the Rich Center for over 3 years now, for the last 4 months as the interim executive director with the Rich Center. Prior to that time, I've been the associate director responsible for the academic programming at the school, as well as outreach in the area. That's mine if it's okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Looking at our budget for fiscal year 21, it's consistent in a lot of ways with prior Rich Center budgets. Some of the anticipated reductions in terms of revenue, consistent with the situation we've all been faced with since mid-March, and as an education program, some anticipated revenues that we didn't quite reach or were able to get off up and rolling with the COVID-19 pandemic. But in the same breath, some of the reductions in regards to expenses around personnel assist with some of the reductions there in revenue. Drawing your attention there to the cash gifts line, it's stated there at 442,862. A big chunk of that is our events and our fundraising, in addition to annual donors and supports to the center. That number updated from the original draft of this budget in May, we feel closer to 350 will be that responsibility to balance the budget. So feeling a little bit stronger about that at this particular point. In addition, we're taking this time. We've had to temporarily relocate here on campus, and appreciative of all of the folks here at YSU that have been a part of our relocation as some renovations are done at Fedor Hall, which is our normal home. So while those safety renovations are being completed at Fedor Hall, we are going to be in Beagley Hall and McKay Auditorium. That's where our younger students are going to be through intermediate. And then the Phelps building on the second floor, our middle school, high school programming administration offices will be housed there. So we are very thankful for the university's support in that process. So it's just with COVID-19, with this relocation, it's a busy time. We've had an administrative change here at the Rich Center, a lot going on, but that doesn't mean we're losing sight of our focuses for growth, for sustainability, to strengthen that future connection here at Youngstown State University. Like I said, I've been here for 3 years, and I'm a doctoral student here. I'm an adjunct professor, and I've worked as an administrator at the Rich Center. And I believe it's taken all three of those capacities to begin to understand, Youngstown State University and the Rich Center for Autism and where those opportunities for strength and growth might lie. So focusing on increased revenue with our enrollment. We know with a school like ours, enrollment has to be a focus, and we're working on a new campaign to ensure that we're better connecting what we're doing in our classrooms with folks that are interested to the schools. How are we making ourselves more accessible to the community and getting the right kinds of students to come to the Rich Center for Autism? Billing for behavior services and hopefully other services in the future. There's a core curriculum of what students receive at the Rich Center. We're working in collaboration with YSU, work on establishing the procedures and the processes where we can bill Medicaid and insurances, and again, increase revenue from those services for families that are interested in additional services. And then really a key area of focus for us is strengthening the research that's done at the Rich Center, whether it's our own research or in conjunction with other programs and universities, but strengthening the research that's done really helps us kind of hit that treatment, education, and research, which is our mission and our vision and our focus, and we believe we can continue to grow right alongside everyone here at YSU. Potential development and I are in the Rich Center. We're two different programs. I will say we probably lose students to potential development, but we also gain students who come from potential development. Our philosophies are a little bit different. They have a teach program. It's very much orchestrated around students individually working through task-oriented types of learning. So they sit there with a learning, like a box full of different learning activities, and there's guidance and there's teaching and support. Our program is a little bit more comprehensive in nature, where we're looking at the state academic standards in conjunction with the behavior programming kind of all lumped together in one in a more traditional classroom setting. But yeah, at times it has.
Fundraising, I assume, too. I work with Paris, so I support both.
Yeah.
We support both of you guys.
Mhm.
Just wondering how that affects revenue from a fundraising standpoint. It is a certain level of competition. So.
Sure, and we again, speaking to our mission and our vision, and found our best avenue, kind of coexisting with potential development here in town, is to do just that. Very friendly relationships with those folks, and I think we present something a little bit different, and kind of speaking to that accessibility point. How can we get that message out to more people to increase that understanding? But that it's something that we're definitely focused on. Yeah, for sure.
Is the enrollment declining next year? You're forecasting?
So our enrollment is right now, as I sit here today, it is exactly where we ended the last school year with our number of students. I do think there is actually more of an opportunity for increasing. It's a lot of uncertainty in education, and parents, quite honestly, are very confused as to making those decisions for their children. And we're seeing a lot of phone calls, a lot of interest coming in, and we're getting to some of those now. Because before, people want to come in for a tour, and we were like, well, in between Fedor Hall and where we were going, weren't quite sure what to show them yet. But now we have our spaces. Our students are coming back on Tuesday the 8th, and they'll be here 4 days a week this year. And we also have a remote option. So again, we're hitting some of those accessibility points for everybody. But for me, enrollment will remain consistent. If we are able to increase it, we will.
So 2020 enrollment was the same as 2019 forecast.
The projected forecast from May was looking at a potential decline on what was forecasted in 2020. The actual numbers aren't necessarily represented on the sheet in front of you.
Will be at about 80 students?
No, we're actually closer to about 55 students right now. And honestly, it's that fine line of not wanting to grow too much right now, just because of our space and our temporary relocation issues and concerns.
So if this resident is adopted and you projected 18% decline in tuition, and that drives some reductions in staff, because that's where the portion that's really coming from. Are you comfortable that we concern over the reductions that are going to be driven on it?
No, I believe this budget is close enough to our actual numbers, what we can project for, this current fiscal year and for the remainder of the school year. Certain classrooms in regards to staffing and personnel are full right now based on what we have. So we're not necessarily looking to increase enrollment in some of those classrooms. So kind of looking at that a little bit smarter and more intentionally than maybe in the past, just saying, oh, we're full versus where can we get some students into those classrooms and still stay within the confines of the personnel that we currently have is certainly where we see ourselves.
If your students are the same, then I guess following up, you're budgeting an 18% decline in tuition is going to be break even. I'm reading small.
So the projected enrollment from the FY 2020 was around 61. The projected enrollment for 21 was 51. So where we fell short in 2020 in those enrollment numbers, we have stayed consistent and, lost a handful of students, one or two. They were both cases that they were able to go back to their public school districts because of the progress they made, but we picked up students as a result. And we picked up a couple contracts with Western Pennsylvania schools, which is also a part of that source of revenue and included. So autism scholarship program and that source of revenue, as well as some of those private contracts with Western Pennsylvania schools, because those students can't qualify for the autism scholarship here in Ohio.
So what we may be missing in this picture, and I think I'm beginning to get it now, is that the fiscal year 2021 is more reflective of current state than what we had budgeted back in 20, which never really
Correct.
came to fruition. So it's the difference between actual and 21 would be notable compared to 20.
Right.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
So the actual for 2020 is lower than the budget there.
Yes.
The actual is lower than that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is there any other questions?
Sure. Our parents don't pay. We consider ourselves tuition free. We utilize primarily Ohio's Autism Scholarship Program. So students that qualify for special ed under the category of autism qualify for the state's autism scholarship. And we use that as the primary source of revenue, in addition to private contracts with other school districts, like I mentioned.
And your cash gifts are kind of your own, through which with its own fundraising, or is that how that works?
Correct. Yeah, we do have multiple events every year. We will do annual appeals throughout the year, but yes, that's through our work. Other capital campaign, university support from the foundation, but generally the fundraising we've been taking on ourselves there.
Would you say actual cash gifts are around 20?
The actual cash gifts in 20. $335, $896.
So that number's accurate. So those are real numbers, not 2020 budget. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I
actually don't. Yeah, I was looking at the same. I actually don't have that with me. We were in a deficit to end the year, and based on our budget, but had the funds to, support it.
Budget for this year.
And I do believe a more reasonable depiction of that 300 to 350, somewhere in that particular range.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to accept the Rich Center operating budget FY21? Second? All in favor? Opposed?
You're really approving that budget?
What's that?
It sounds like a lot of numbers aren't right. Is this the budget you're approving?
The 2021, with the understanding that it does not correlate to the fiscal year.
Right.
So I think we're saying that we're approving the 2.150645, but there's obviously going to have to be some adjustments based on their own cash giving or not cash giving, and they're going to have to manage.
Well, they're 100,000 off, at least.
Yeah.
It was just saying it's going to be between 300 and 350, not 442.
Right.
Would it be reasonable to ask at the December meeting to
Come back.
20 and 21?
Right.
Actual numbers, and then compare it to the budget.
So do we want to put this on hold then? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think they need the budget back.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's interest in seeing the actual rate of 2020 numbers are. I think that does.
Okay, so we will approve this budget for 21, but we want them to come back in December with the numbers for 20. Correct. Right. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That was, I think, the motion, the second.
Yeah, we.
Okay.
Maybe you can come back with a little discussion of the fundraising costs.
Absolutely.
Mike would test your development.
He is.
NCS going on.
Sure.
That looks like to be a gap. Has some concern. Realists sitting around the table. But we have found in development that there's starting to be a little uptake. We'll see.
And I can project, we did already have our first fundraiser for this year. And it was a rescheduled night at the races evening from April. We had a virtual night at the races back in August, and that event raised $42,000. We were planning on raising $20,000 to $25,000, and with a large donation, as well as just the success of the event. So to have that event that was initially slated for the previous fiscal year to begin our current fiscal year, we are feeling very, positive in that regard.
10%.
Not being as comfortable, Mr. Chairman, with the Rich Center University relationship. I know we'll have some things coming back on the audit, but I think it would be helpful for us as trustees to have a look at that agreement, whether even in its current form of 2010. And I know that there's probably going to be an update coming up here, but even us doing this process, I think before, you're right, it was always included with the operating budget documents, the whole packet. So it never kind of came out, but I think we all need to be much more included.
And I think there's been, being how has overseen this for what, 8 years now?
That's correct.
And there's been some ups and downs all the way from the beginning of the thing, where it was going to be research focused, and it kind of went away from that, and now we're going back toward research focus and its interaction with the university. So I think it wouldn't hurt to have a little history lesson, maybe in December.
Like I said, I appreciate all of your input, and be more than happy to continue to provide any information to help solidify this process and continue our growth together. The last 4 months for me, it's been a lot of new learning, and I will continue to provide for you, the best that I can, so we can continue this.
The anecdotal things, and I get lots of anecdotal things in my inbox, have been pretty positive about the culture and the trajectory. Do you agree?
I would, but I have to say that, we didn't have to make a lot of changes very fast, not only COVID, and I was Greg and I were both very determined. July 7th, those kids are going back, and they did go back. And no impact at all in terms of health, no health impacts, big impact on those families. And that took a huge amount of planning, because every family is different. Then, we come to find out, we're gonna have to move out. And we found that out, that was, unknown information came to light with Greg's ascendancy. And, not only that, but we were looking at several external sites, and we found out that those evaporated, about 3 weeks ago, I'd say.
Mhm.
And we went through the process, and, Mr. Pike was very, very helpful, and, guiding us through that practice. We found, locations on, ISU campus, found 2 locations, and then we discovered they weren't gonna work because of the permitting. We had to switch them, and they figured out how they could work with the permitting, and we switched them, so the little kids went one place, and the big kids went another. So I have to applaud, Mr. Suki, Dr. with his acumen seeing through it. It's been, there's been a lot of balls in the air with this, so I think we're on the right track. I think that this year's actuals are matching this year's projected budget. And the number for the fundraising is basically the number that has to be made up for fundraising. So typically, we get more fundraising than that, but the only fundraising we reported in the budget is that is required to fill the gap. So I'm feeling very positive about that as well.
I guess my point is, I think we're in a lot better place than we've been. This is really the first discussion we really had about this. We've had a lot of discussions, but you haven't had one. I think we're heading in the right direction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next would be a resolution to approve the interfund transfers. Katrina?
Yeah, so Katrina's going to come up here and join me. So there is a resolution in your packet to approve a number of transfers, most of which have to do with our year-end financial performance for fiscal year 2020, which ended on June 30th, just 2 months ago. But before we ask you to approve those transfers, we wanted to provide a little bit of context and brief you on the university's financial performance for the fiscal year. So Katrina and her staff in the controller's office have been working really hard to close the books on FY 2020. This year was a little bit unique, I would say, largely because of the COVID, but also the influx of the CARES Act dollars. And it struck me that we've mentioned the CARES Act a number of times, and we never said what it stands for. It's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. That we all refer to as the CARES Act. But as I mentioned earlier, we are extremely grateful and fortunate to have received those federal dollars. But those are essentially, at the end of the day, restricted grants from the federal government. So a great deal of effort is really required to make sure that the expenses that we identify as being COVID related, the revenue losses that we identify as being related to the pandemic are in fact that. Because we'll need to document that and demonstrate that to our auditors. So the document that I'm going to be referring to, I think, is page 330 if you're following online, and it's just it's a table that looks like this. This one here. So I wanted to talk about that for just a minute. So this is a very high-level summary of the university's operating performance for fiscal year 2020. Specifically for current funds that were budgeted for FY 2020. So that, of course, includes the university's general fund and auxiliary funds, auxiliaries being those areas on campus that support non-instructional services, but also generate revenue to support their operations, so the rec center, housing, athletics, and so on. So taken together, you can see, if you want to just kind of look over at that grand total column to the far right, total operating revenues last year totaled $173 million, and total expenses and transfers totaled just under $171 million. That means that the university's budget ended fiscal year 2020 with a positive fund balance of $2.5 million, as is shown in the yellow shading there. So that's really positive news. But before we, congratulate ourselves too much, we really do need to understand the impact of those federal CARES dollars that we talked about a few minutes ago. So as you can see in that gray shaded area, beginning on line 6, we were able to identify nearly $4.3 million in expenses and revenue losses that we believe qualify as permissible uses of CARES funds. In other words, we identified $4.3 million in activity that occurred primarily or entirely as a result of the COVID pandemic. Had we not received the CARES Act funding from the federal government, we would have ended the year not with a $2.5 million fund balance, but rather a $1.7 million deficit. So, I'm not trying to be overly negative here, but I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that had we not received these federal dollars, we would not be asking the board, or we would be asking the board to approve transfers to close a deficit at year end. So that's a very important point to make because those CARES Act dollars are in fact one-time dollars and we can't rely on them going forward. So that aside, we just wanted to provide a little bit of context, but the action before the committee today is to approve. Please.
On, you identified 4.3 million that got CARES Act dollars for.
Yes.
So we got the dollars good, but how much of that money would not have been spent?
Well, that's a good point. Theoretically, none of it. So in theory, we would have ended the budget similarly to how we would have if COVID hadn't happened at all. But we thought it was very important to show the impact of the federal dollars, because it's possible that we could have a pandemic and not receive federal relief dollars. So in theory, we should have ended like this, but there are some nuances to that. One example is, for example, our state share of instruction funding from the state, our state funding was cut by $1.4 million at the end of last fiscal year. So we were only able to recover from CARES Act dollars about $354,000.
There would still be even more with that.
Yeah, possibly. But yes, right. And the reason we were only able to capture $354,000 instead of the full 1.4 is because we're limited to how much we could spend in CARES dollars on institutional costs based on what we spent for the student financial aid piece. So we have not fully exhausted our financial aid piece. So we can't spend more on institutional revenue losses and things like that than we can on student financial aid. So that's why I'm telling Eddie he's got to get those student aid dollars out so we can fully use our institutional CARES Act dollars. So there are some nuances like that, but in theory, we should have ended pretty much like this with or without COVID.
Okay. But the context of that's still tight.
Yeah.
Still 1 or 2%.
Oh, no,
So we're always near the end of the year, cut back and so forth, so we end up in the black.
Right. So the report that's right behind the resolution is actually the transfer report. So the first set of transfers there we're asking to approve is really mostly, I think, a formality at this point. We're asking to approve $529,000 in transfers from the CARES Act fund to the university funds that are listed here. So that was already reflected on that summary report I just shared with you. So we're assuming you're going to approve that. And the second grouping of transfers we're asking you to approve is to just transfer that $2.5 million in our year-end balance. We're asking you to approve a transfer to our operating carry forward fund. And that's where the dollars will stay until we come back to you, maybe in December, with a proposed plan for allocating those funds. And then the third set of transfers listed here are sort of our routine transfers that have to do with making sure we have funds in place to enable us to meet our annual debt service obligations. Katrina, is there anything you want to say about those transfers or any of these transfers?
I just wanted to mention that when you look at the operating performance report, we had, for loss of revenue, we pulled in $3.2 million into the transfers in, and then the rest of the CARES Act fund was actually reflected as reduction in expenses. And we were able to move, I think it might have been about $500,000 in, just a second, I lost here. We identified compensation. Oh, that was so little, I can't read it. of about $500,000 in compensation that we actually moved over to the CARES Act fund, and the rest of the money were actual expenses that we incurred. And as Neil said, that actually, so those expenses are not reflected in the operating funds. We were able to move those expenses over to the restricted CARES Act fund. And again, the other loss of revenue, we actually moved the money from the restricted fund and pulled it into the general fund and the operating funds, and it's reflected as a transfer in.
Yeah, the only other thing I should say about was that last set of transfers for debt service. I said they were routine, and they are, because we do that every year. It's also a good reminder that, you know, we're going to need to continue making debt service payments at least through the year 2034, because that's what our debt goes out to, our debt service schedule. So, and over the next few years, you know, we're going to need to figure out ways to continue to set aside more money to fund that debt service, because a lot of these, our debt service up to this point has been funded by gifts. And as those gifts fully mature and the gift funds are starting to run dry, we're going to have to continue making debt service payments. That means it's going to be more pressure on the university to fund those debt service payments as opposed to those gifts. So that's something that we're going to be, it's really high on our radar,
Right.
that we're going to be engaging. And so as we talk about budget development and establishing priorities, whether it's putting money aside for marketing campaign or other priorities, debt service is also a priority.
Yeah, but we just have, after these transfers, we just have under $2 million left in those reserve funds. So those gift monies that we had previously gotten from, and most of those were from the business school pledges when we had our campaign, and we took that money and we, as those pledge monies were coming in, we set them aside for future debt service. But we are now down to, like I said, just under $2 million. And as Neil said, this is something that we need to be very careful about.
Neil, can we refinance some of this?
Yeah, we've done that a couple times over the last 10 years. We are looking at possibly refinancing the 2011 series debt. Or is it, no, I think it's the 2010 series.
What's the rate of those fees?
I couldn't tell you offhand. But the municipal bond market, I mean, the cost, you got to weigh the cost of issuance versus what you're saving over the long term. It's been municipal bond market's been just a little bit rocky. So, and then there's some weird things that Moody's is doing in terms of reporting our unfunded liabilities, state of Ohio's unfunded liability associated with the retirement state system, state retirement systems. And I think that's going to create a little bit more, I don't know, angst among potential bond buyers about, you know, state universities in Ohio in particular, with regard to the municipal market. But I mean, long way of saying, yes, we can, and we're looking at that, but we're not convinced that's going to save a lot of money yet.
When we refinance, do we push it out for a year?
No, you don't have to. You can, but not always. No, we haven't done that.
We're a little bit afraid of that, right?
Yeah.
And we have low debt too. We just have about $59 million of outstanding principal is what our debt is.
Yeah, we're one of the lowest in the state of Ohio. With regard to debt. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's, so this does require action by the finance committee. This is an action item. We're asking you for approval today.
Any other questions? The motion to approve the resolution? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Resolution.
Sure. There are, I think, 4 policies on the agenda today. They're all on the consent agenda, meaning they're up for review as part of the university's standard 5-year review cycle. That means there were no material changes being recommended at this time. We typically don't spend too much time on consent items, but I can certainly respond to any questions anyone has about the policies.
Are there any questions on the consent items? Move on. Okay, we're moving then to resolution to renew, well, we actually did this. I'll go ahead. Need to vote on it. That was my fault. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, resolution to renew and amend the audit subcommittee charter. We did that already.
The audit subcommittee did. The audit subcommittee, I think Kelly may have left, but that's okay. Because the audit subcommittee is just that, a subcommittee of the finance committee, it's, the full committee does need to approve the charter.
I move that we approve the charter.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Moving on to C2A tab 8, planning and construction projects update.
It's actually Mr. Rich White.
It was evil twin. Thank you. Thank you very much. Despite the pandemic, we've been very busy and we actually got a lot accomplished over the summer. I'll just kind of run through what we've got complete and what's still ongoing. Campus roof replacements for Folk Hall and Ward Beecher, the Ward Beecher Science Hall structural repairs, the athletic team locker rooms in Stambaugh and in Beagley, the Beatty Field replacement and the pedestrian bridge renovations, the Mosier-Cushwa Bridge and the Stavich Bridge. Those are all complete. Those have all been completed. The academic area renovations project, a little bit of work over in Mog and over in Beagley Pool, and also the parking deck maintenance and parking lot resurfacing. Those projects are also complete. A couple of projects that we do have ongoing. One is the Innovation Commercialization Center. I think Mike gave you an update on that, or David gave you an update on that. That's moving very well. It's been under construction for the past 3 months, and we're looking forward to a March 21 completion. Restroom renovations over in Cushwa, also Cushwa Physical Therapy 2 renovations. Those are going to be complete by the end of this week. We had a late release from controlling board, which is why those are a little bit late in completing. Also feeder hall renovations, that was also late from controlling board. That just got started a couple of weeks ago and should be done by the end of the year. And the last ongoing project that we have is the Covelli Arched Entryway on the sports fields west of 5th. That's actually just got underway. We have it under contract. It's underway, and probably early November that will be complete. And that's an update of everything that we completed over summer and ongoing.
And if I could, it's not a YSU project. Of course, we all have a great interest in the Fifth Avenue project. And I think the president had mentioned it earlier. But that project is well underway, talking to the contractor. They expect to work through the winter, provided that we don't have, and in 2020, who knows what we're going to face. But they're planning on working through the winter, and the project should be completed for sure by July. Hopefully it'll complete before that.
Any questions? Thanks, John. Rich.
Thank you.
I have a question about that, but about the background material related to them. I think they would be
Sure.
I noticed in the background materials that the diversity and edge spend, that we seem to be going back instead of forward. And I know we talked a lot about it as a board, our intent around trying to make sure that we address those issues of whether we want to label it as social justice or whether we want to label it as diversity spend, either way we want it together. But we went from 9.9% of the addressable spend tied to that down to 6.45. And I realize the numbers shift and that and vendor shift and all those things. But my question is, what do we proactively do to improve those numbers and to identify those organizations that we can increase that spending?
Well, typically what we do is all the capital projects, we're asking for 5% participation across the board. Very few will say that they can't get participation, and there's a long list of things that they can do to try to get that participation. A lot of the times that we have difficulty finding it is maybe with a consultant, a specialty consultant, maybe a structural engineer or something like that. But our goal is always 5%. I'd have to look a little bit deeper to find out why those numbers have crept down the way they have. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised at that because we've been doing so much work.
Right. Well, I know that capital is a key piece of that, and
Right.
also it's just general spending.
Yeah.
Capital or not.
I think the decrease is mostly in the fourth quarter, and that is when COVID hit. I think most of our spending or our big purchases were in technology. So our big purchases were probably through Dell and Apple and other technology vendors that
could explain it.
aren't minority. So I think that fourth quarter really kind of tamped down what the numbers would have otherwise been in a normal year, I think. Mhm. Yes, it's flat. It's the fourth quarter.
So do we have, annual, vendor versus supplier events and things like that, trying to target and identify? Do we have those?
No, we used to.
I know
I'm
you do.
looking for Katrina, she might have left.
Some of the others, they have annual events that really strive to do that. Do we do that?
We used to do that. I don't think we've done it as far as I can recollect, and John, you might want to jump in, but I don't think we've done it in a while, or I haven't been invited to one. But we used to do that.
And that would not have been, as a planning and construction function, but rather as a purchase.
Right, and we'd be invited to that, sure.
Which is yeah.
So I don't think we've had a great variance, as Rich said, in the participation that we're getting on the capital projects, because that seems to be fairly steady, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think Neil may have hit the nail on the head with the reduction that we're seeing right now.
Something to think about.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, Neil, update on university property and casualty insurance.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a brief update on that, and there is a background document in your materials, or I think it's on screen page 370. So YSU participates in the IUC, or Inter-University Council Insurance Consortium. That enables us to spread risk among other Ohio State universities, and also helps us leverage better pricing through volume on our premiums. So it's on the agenda today, really mainly because we wanted to bring you kind of up to date on some factors, the COVID pandemic being one of them, that has really impacted our insurance premiums, which we're already beginning to sort of trend upward as the higher education sector really is becoming increasingly regarded as high risk, at least regarding insurability. So many universities across the country are submitting insurance claims under the auspices of lost revenue due to the interruption in normal business functions that COVID has clearly presented for most colleges and universities. And YSU is presently working with the IUC to evaluate whether or not we should submit an insurance claim. So regardless of the outcome of those claims, I think one safe assumption is that we'll all be subject to even higher premiums going forward. So, and even before COVID, our premiums were beginning to edge upward as a result of a number of costly Title IX lawsuits at universities across the country. It's difficult to say how much those cases have cost collectively higher education, because so many of those lawsuits are settled with undisclosed agreements wherein the details are kept confidential. But it's easy to know that those settlements can range easily between $350,000 and $1 million, depending on the circumstances. But if you take that and you add in the pandemic, we are projecting a 21% increase in our insurance premiums this year, meaning that our insurance premiums will be over $500,000 this year. So that's one thing we wanted to just put on our radar. We also wanted to mention that as pressure continues to build on the insurance sector, and as universities across the country submit insurance claims related to COVID, not only will our premiums continue to go up, but our coverages could start to slide, and our deductibles could start to escalate to the point where in a couple of years from now, we could be in a position to be considering a self-insurance model for property and casualty insurance. So we're already self-insured for health insurance. So the concept is not completely foreign to us. But if we were to become self-insured for property and casualty insurance, that would be a significant shift of risk to the university that would require us to set additional funds aside to cover things that would otherwise be covered by insurance. So that we really just wanted to have a verbal discussion today, just to kind of give you an understanding of the insurance picture out there, and also let you know that we are considering submitting an insurance claim and working with the IUC, and we will certainly keep you up to date going forward as these things evolve.
Is that like a business interruption claim?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what other universities are doing?
Yes, for some universities, it's a slam dunk, especially if you're a residential university where you've got millions and millions of dollars tied up in housing. You took a lot of losses. And the CARES Act dollars that those universities received was just a drop in the bucket. So they're more likely to submit insurance claims and that will be successful. For us, it's not as clear because a lot of our CARES Act dollars have really helped us, and we don't have a huge inventory of student housing when we took those types of losses. So, but we're still considering it.
When you say a slam dunk, have you seen the insurance companies pay?
When I say slam dunk, I just mean, I shouldn't have said slam dunk. It's a sure thing.
Because I know businesses, insurance is saying,
right,
they're
right.
not paying.
But the case that they have to make a claim is a slam dunk because they can demonstrate the losses. When 90% of your students are living on campus and housing, the losses they had were tremendous. And
it's not creative writing, it's legitimate.
Yes, yes.
That's why we need to count our blessings that we didn't have as high a residential population, therefore not as much rebate. And our percent of Pell eligible students was 44%. In the CARES Act funding, the number one factor was what percent of your students are Pell eligible. So we were very fortunate to be on the right end of both those things.
Yeah, and just like if I could, the fact that the expansion in our housing that we have done over the last 5 years has been completely done by the we've leased property to private developers. So we shifted all that risk to private developers such as the Edge, the Enclave, the Flats, and even the Lofts. So that was somewhat brilliant of us because had we done that all ourselves, it was brilliant then and it's brilliant today. But seriously, if those apartments would have been on our campus, we would have been subject to refunds. So.
Campus loss is not.
It's not.
Okay, any other questions? Thanks. We'll move on to the report of the audit subcommittee. The audit subcommittee did meet with Kelly for the program in addition to that. As well as, Capri, do you have anything to add with the investment subcommittee?
I do not.
Okay. All right, is there any new business?
Yes, there is. We have Jim Yukich to talk a little bit about our strategic alignment solution and our plan assessment.
Good afternoon. So we're in year 3 of a master services agreement that we signed with Allocation, who is our core vendor for all of our student information system and ERP system. So we are a single vendor at our core. So they're a big part of our business. We pay them about $1 million a year in that as part of that master services agreement. The good news is when we signed that 2.5 years ago, we saved about $100,000 a year because we went in with 4 other universities as part of the IUC. And so we negotiated a very strong agreement. The other thing we included in that agreement was a strategic one during that tenure of the 5 years, and we could pick any time to do that. We have a free engagement to do a strategic alignment process with all the applications that Allocation has on campus to make sure we're getting the most out of our tools. So that's what I wanted to share with you. We did that the second week of July. I'm on slide 2 now. We had over, let's see, I get my glasses on here. We had 13 meetings with different groups across campus, all different stakeholders, both faculty, staff, students, several student interviews. But where this really ties into, and slide 2 is, I brought this forward in March because this is our jumping off point for IT to match the IT strategic plan with the new YSU strategic plan. And as part of that Take Charge of Our Future initiative, this is the slide I shared with you in March because we're heading down that path of doing this alignment then. And now that we're pulling this strategic alignment plan together with Allocation, we'll finalize that application, integration, and analytics part of our, I know I've talked to this group before about the technology pyramid, infrastructure, applications, integration, and analytics. This will get those 3 tiers towards the top. This will be finalizing that. And then March, maybe at the March meeting or maybe the June meeting next year, we'll come forward with our YSU IT strategic plan that is completely intertwined with the take charge of our future business plan. Okay. Going on to slide 3. So the first thing that they showed us, those of you who have implemented systems, I know Molly, you're very proficient in implementing systems, right? The longer you have a system in place, the less your capabilities start to drop, right? Because in 2006, there was this huge, hundreds of people trained. You had this implementation team that was locked arm in arm for 6 months or a year, and capabilities were really high when you came out of that, right? And then over the years, people leave, people move into different roles, they get promoted. Now they're no longer the systems person, maybe they're a manager of something. There's some transfer of knowledge, but it's not quite perfect, right? So this chart really shows you that over time, and we didn't put a measure here, but over time, those capabilities go down. Well, what happens with the vendor? The vendor keeps upgrading the system to give you higher and higher functionality, but your people capabilities go down. And what you end up with over a span of, like us, 14 years, is your capabilities are now low from your people resource training perspective, and the functionality of the system, you're not using it to its fullest. So that really is the core purpose of this engagement, was to come in, hold all these meetings, understand where those gaps are, and then come up with some recommendations and a timeline to get those capabilities back up to where they need to be. So going on to slide 3, I did put the student interview as part of the findings because I thought it was important. We say student at the middle, all part of take charge, student-centric. So we wanted to make sure that we included at least a couple of students. Now, some also could go online and take the survey, which of the 121 people who responded, we had at least 10 to 15 students respond as well. But I wanted to make sure we interviewed 2 students to understand how they felt. Our student feedback was phenomenal. I mean, it really was. Our student feedback felt that they were very satisfied with their YSU education. They talked about how a lot of the faculty are using Blackboard. A lot of them, they're getting a lot of good information when they need to use Banner, the self-service tools. We haven't upgraded some of them yet, but even the older tools are still at least meeting needs, but we'll get better, right? This is advancing those capabilities, but even now, even though our capabilities aren't what they could be, our capabilities are performing well enough because our student feedback was very strong. When we looked at some of the gaps in capabilities, it was really at the staff level. The people using the systems day to day. They're like, well, yeah, when I moved into this role, somebody sort of showed me what to do, and I just keep doing that, right? I keep doing that same thing. Well, then the system gets upgraded, but they're not taking advantage of those advanced features because no one's ever retrained them on those new feature sets. So that's where our real gaps are there. And then what happens is, if you don't know how to do it in the system with the advanced capability, what do? A manual process. You say, well, then we'll fill out a form, or I'll make a phone call and somebody will chart it, check a box, right? So you revert to manual process. And that's what's happened for us over the last 14 years. Things are still getting done and people are getting their jobs done. They're just not taking full advantage of the systems we have in place. That also ends then reporting, data integrity, and integration. Those areas, those are more of, I think of, there's day-to-day reporting and that's going well. But when you think about where we need to be analytics-wise and some of those advanced knowledge sets that people need to really get out ahead of the curve, especially where we are with COVID and everything like that, we really have to be better future looking. We're not quite there with those capabilities. And that really stuck out in the findings as well. When I go to slide the next slide. Where are some of our quick wins? So we talked about what can we, there's some stuff we can do right now that's not going to cost us anything or very little, right? Training, we can, I've got Sharon Zembauer, she's one of our trainers. We've got Rosalind Donaldson. We have other people involved. We can get some training things together and just, institute a training plan and advance capabilities pretty quickly. So that's something that came out. There's also these online resources. Allution has this free service called Allution Community. Our IT people live and die by it because there's a technology community, but then there's also a user community. We looked at our technology community, and they keep usage stats at Allution. We're using it a lot in IT. We're living and dying by it. Our customer community, nobody's logging in. Just because they don't know. It's not because they don't know it's not because they don't want that resource. They just don't know the resource really exists. So we have to educate and communicate that there's this invaluable resource out there. A lot of outdated desk procedures, and that's just as day-to-day integration. Even though we've become Allution first over the last couple years, I think 2 years now, we've decided that whenever we look at a system, we always look at Allution first. And if their system doesn't at least meet the bare feature set that we need, then and only then do we look at somebody else, because all of their stuff is tightly integrated out of the box. But we still have some systems from before 2 years ago, and we need to do a better job integrating those systems. So, we have some quick wins. They did an excellent job through this process of identifying those quick wins. And through our IT governance committees, we will be prioritizing those quick wins and how to implement those over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, so that we can at least, I'll say, for a very low cost, little to no cost, up our capabilities dramatically in the next year. Going on to the phase recommendation, and that's where I see this phase one: optimize current product suite and fill those gaps through education and through the Allution community. So we'll be looking at integration, training, some systems analysis. We might engage Allution in a little bit of consulting where we don't have an expert in that space. We might need to bring them in and help us see some of that advanced feature set. But again, I see that as the low cost. Phase two would be the next year, and that's where we'll get through that, and that's where we get into workflow analytics. They recommended their mobile platform, but Eddie Howard brought in Ooh La La at the time, now Ready Education. I'm glad they changed their name, by the way. I always felt a little funny saying Ooh La La, right? So I'm glad they changed their name, but we have a great mobile platform, and if you go out to the App Store and you download the Y app, our students love that thing, and Eddie's team has done a phenomenal job getting them on that. So year one, focus on getting our house in order with training and integration. Year two, workflow and analytics, it'll take us to that next level of capabilities, and that's where we stand. We'll be about in the very last slide. Our next steps. We're going to evaluate and prioritize our recommendations. We're going to leverage our IT governance groups that meet on a monthly basis, because they're the ones who are hands-on working with this day in and day out. We've got every stakeholder in the university as part of those governance committees. We're in year three of IT governance, and it is maturing dramatically. Year one, I was like, I don't have much hair, as you can see, but what little I had, I was yanking out in year one, because governance is new, and collaborate. Whenever you're trying to do things like that in governance, it's tough. But we're very mature in our IT governance now, and we're going to leverage those groups to prioritize this out over the next 2 years. We think that all the new stuff, the year two stuff, we're looking at about $500,000 of software between workflow and analytics. However, that group I talked about that signed that MSA, and we're in year 3 right now, we're renegotiating with Allution, because we think we can bring some real things to the table to help them advance their product set. So maybe we'll get some of that kind of stuff in for free, and it won't be $500,000. Maybe it'll be a couple $100,000. That's my hope. And we'll be able to get there I'm going to say 2 years seems reasonable, but we'll allow our governance committees to choose, to set that timeline in stone. Like make 10 minutes? I know Mike was, yes.
Obviously, you can't get to one of our key principles of the future, we talk about boards, big data-driven decisions. My question is there anything that we need to do that's not yet captured and represented in the budget for this coming year based on what has to happen?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably countless things. I mean, I think the challenge we have is that the things that we want to do, some of the things we need to do, our priorities exceed our resources to fund them. So it's really, the answer is yes. Whether it's more marketing money for, a marketing campaign, or it's more money in our debt service budget, or it's these types of things, it's really, we have to make those decisions because the needs outweigh the resources available.
And I would imagine, some will be out of resolution if we want those, but, are we also pursuing outside support funding, things that may help fund some of the technology changes that we need to make? Are we pursuing?
Well, I don't know if we're pursuing anything like that specifically.
Typically the ones we've seen come out there that are like grant dollars, and a lot of the stuff that I've seen through COVID that we've applied for indirectly or directly and indirectly as groups is the infrastructure stuff. They all want to help you with your Wi-Fi. They all want to help you fund your Wi-Fi and your infrastructure. Usually when you get up into the application layers like this, they're not as, you don't see as much available in that space. But I got to tell you, we're doing some great things with these other 4 universities, Kent, University of Toledo, Miami of Ohio, and Wright State. Those are the other banner schools or Allocation schools in Ohio. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're able to get a good portion of what we're talking about out of that collaboration agreement at at minimum, a much lower cost than we would pay on our own.
Just reminds me when you talk about that, especially the training side, insurance know-how is everywhere.
Yes.
I don't know if she had 10 more minutes in her life. And I feel the same way about Provost Smith in terms of training of deans or training of the department chairs and so forth. He's very capable, she's very capable. They don't have enough hours in the day, but I do believe that training is one of the areas where we just need to be better. And when you put, like Neil says, we've got this long wish list, we need to be better at a lot of different things. That is the discussion when we talk finance. We get all the division heads, all the VPs and deans and so forth in the room saying, okay, what's on our wish list? What do we really need to do to get better? We just got to make sure all the different things, because technology has been brought up here a lot throughout the course of the whole day, in the future of education. And but training just in general is so needed. And I think we need to get a part of our capital campaign for training dollars. We talk about critical need for a university our size.
Yeah.
We just don't have that budget line. We can do so much with it. And Provost Smith doesn't have time to do all the training, but he can certainly monitor that if we had feet on the ground, just like Sharon and Rosalind could do the same. They don't have time. We work them to death. Anyway, it's just a great reminder when we start thinking about finance and where we need to invest is, there are some crucial areas.
Well, I know one of the approaches that we're looking to take, and we've had some success with this with Banner when we did the Banner 9 rollout, is sort of that train the trainer approach, where you get somebody like Shannon or Sharon who's very strong at this, and then you train your managers and your senior staff who then train their, the next level of staff. And you're right, though. I mean, if we had a much bigger training budget, we could do that quicker and probably at a higher level. But, you know, we'll do what we can do and do it to a full capability. But yeah, having some additional dollars to, for that would be great. The ongoing, yes. Right, like, so some type of annual, right?
Same thing, we've got new needs, we've got new partner shares.
Yeah.
we've got, you know, our teaching learning institute, just the training of our faculty, we have not invested in much as we would love to, right?
You know, interestingly, we have these really detailed online training manuals, but they're really not effective. People learn when somebody's sitting with them showing. You can't, most people can't just read a manual. Yeah, and applying. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Just a reminder to the board that we do have background materials in your packet as well. Is there any other new business?
No, sir.
I have a motion to adjourn the meeting adjourned.
We'll go ahead and stand and break and then come back.
Hey, Jim.
Mr. President, now that we got the state, the field